Okay, we're in a series right now we're calling Cover to Cover. It's 15 weeks. We started it last week. And these first few weeks, I'm actually going to get into the beginning of the Bible today, the first cover of the Bible. But what I'm trying to do throughout this time is, share with you some ways of interpreting the Bible and learning how to read the Bible better. And so we're going to take a lot of these things that it'll have kind of an educational component that will hopefully be able to be applied when you're reading the Bible at home by yourself. Maybe you're listening to someone teach the Bible and you're going, should I be taking what they said? Is that correct? You won't sort of be at the mercy of everybody else. You'll be able to actually take these tools and use them for yourselves. And we live in a day now where you have more tools for this process than you've ever had. It's a great time to be alive. This week, what I want to do is I want to look at the Bible as literature. We're going to look at the Bible as literature, as history, and theology. I got a letter a few weeks ago from a guy I've known most of my life. He's actually my dad's friend, so he kind of became my friend over time, but he was my dad's friend. He's older than I am, and he's a guy I've known. I don't know him like super well, but I've known him for a long time, and I always had great affection for this guy. And he sends me a letter in the mail, and so I get the letter, and I'm reading it. And I'm trying to take what I know about him, what I know about his life. My dad's given me little updates about him over the years, and so I know a little bit about his journey and kind of where he's at. So I have a little bit of context, and then I have the letter, and I have the things that he wrote down. And as I was reading it, I just have the words on the page. I'm going, okay, I totally get what he meant there, but I wonder what was behind that. I wonder what he meant there. And I start kind of drawing conclusions or making assumptions about what I think that he meant. And I decided as I was sitting there trying to decide what action I was going to take from this letter, if I was going to take any at all, I decided to pick up the phone and call the man. So I call him and I say, hey, thank you for the letter. We have a conversation. I ask some clarifying questions. Hey, tell me more about this. Tell me more about that. And it turns out some of the interpretations I had from his letter, the assumptions that I made were dead wrong. I actually was wrong about it. I was missing on something. I might have taken the wrong action related to it had I not called him, asked a few questions, and ultimately learned more that caused me to be able to absorb the letter in the way that he intended it and then take even better action than I would have taken had I never called him up. I would say this, one of the reasons I did that is because I care about this guy, and it's a way of showing honor to someone to dig deeper beyond just their words into what was their intent. And what I would tell you is to take a critical view of the Bible, not in a nasty critical way, like don't be critical. No, I'm talking like to go in and ask the right questions, to dig deeper is the ultimate honor of the Word of God. And the more that we learn these literary tools, we don't just read something on the surface, jump to a theological conclusion, but we look at these literary elements, and at times it may take some education, it might at times be a bit laborious, but if you'll do it, you'll honor the text the most you possibly can to go, what was the intent of this author? And then now, what is the appropriate action that I take from it? And that's what we're trying to learn how to do. In a sense, it might feel like we're demystifying the Bible. That's not what we're doing. In a sense, what we're doing is, I think we're honoring it. We're not taking the awe away from the Bible. We're not taking our reverence away from the Bible. But when we look at it as literature and history, we are honoring, this inspired word and what was the intent of the original author, just like I did with the letter from my friend. And so what I want to do is continue to try to equip you to be able to do that. I'm going to give you a couple of vocabulary words as we start off. These are things that may come up in the future, but these are just good things for you to have as you think about interpreting the Bible as literature and history before you create your theology. The first is the word exegesis. All right, exegesis, go ahead and bring up that vocabulary word. It means it is the critical explanation or interpretation of a text, especially a scripture. So when you think about exegesis, think of it simply like this. This is historical in nature, and what you're trying to do is discover the original intent. We're going to look today in Genesis 1, attributed to Moses. We're talking 3,500 years ago. and he's writing it to a specific group of people at a specific moment in time. Exegesis would be to do our historical contextual work to understand and close the historical distance between us and 3,500 years ago so that we can know what they would have heard when they read it. That's exegesis. The second is hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is a branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary texts. So now what that means is once we've done exegesis and we know what they heard then, we know hermeneutics is the study of interpretation, which is what do we do now? So how do I take what was heard and said then, and then how does that now interpret into our context as in terms of how we interpret it and what we do with it here and now? Does that make sense? So those two terms, okay, you're gonna wanna be familiar with. This is why when you think about the Bible in its literary form, you wanna be careful that you don't fall into mindsets that might sound good on the surface, but might not actually be as good as they sound. For example, you hear people will say, I just take the Bible literally. You don't need to study it, just read it and do what it says. You know, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. You read it, do it. And in a sense, that sounds good, and I would hope that the spirit of that statement would be, hey, let's not overcomplicate and think our way out of obedience, okay? I hope that's the spirit of that, but that really could be a mistake because the Bible is full of literary artistry. And so you have a lot of things like figures of speech. You have different ways that we would look at things in our modern Western context versus an ancient Near Eastern document. You're going to miss things if you take that approach. Let me give you an example. If you ask me, Greg, are you ready? And I say, I was born ready. I was born ready, right? That's a figure of speech. 1,000 years, 3,500 years from now, they're studying what I said and they're going, Greg Ford made this statement. We take him literally, all right? And he said he was born ready, okay? And what am I saying? When I say I was born ready, am I literally saying, hey, from the moment I emerged from the birth canal and came out as an infant, I was prepared for everything I needed? If you take it literally, you're like, this was a statement that Greg was making that, when most, infants are completely helpless and they don't know anything and they have to go through a process of development, but not Greg Ford. Greg Ford came out, and when he came out, he was born ready. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's a figure of speech. What I'm saying is, look, I am passionate about how ready I am. I am excited. Whatever we're into, I'm totally into it. I can't be more ready than I am right now. That's the statement. It's a statement of passion. It's not a literal statement. The Bible is full of these types of things, okay? So when we think about particularly Western, we like literal. We like definitions. We like bullet points. When we look at numbers, we look at numbers as quantitative. And we're looking for numeric accuracy, which is why we might argue for this number means this in the Bible. When you look from an Eastern perspective, they use a lot of word pictures. They use a lot of symbols. They're not necessarily breaking down the definition of omnipotent or omniscient. They're saying God is a strong tower. He's a rock. He's living water. They're using a lot of word pictures, and even numbers in the Bible often are more qualitative or symbolic than they are quantitative or numeric. Let me give you, here's a great example. We looked toward the end of last year, we looked in Matthew 14 and 15 of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Remember this in Matthew 14? And if you keep reading in Matthew 15, Jesus feeds 4,000, right? You remember that? We talked about that? Okay, so if you start reading that, you look at numbers through a Western lens, we read it and we remember the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. How many loaves? 5 loaves. How many fish? 2 fish. And then he feeds 5 loaves, 2 fish. They feed all these 5,000 people. And then at the end of it, they collected baskets of leftovers. You remember how many baskets there were? 12, all right? So we see 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people, 12 baskets. And we don't think anything of it. We just go, well, that's 5, 2, whatever. They're just quantitative numbers. And then you read chapter 15 and he feeds 4,000 with 7 loaves. It says a few fish and 7 baskets left over. We read right over it. In the Jewish Near Eastern, still to this day, numbers have symbols. So the number 2 is symbolic. It represents the 2 tablets that Moses brought off the mountain. The number 5 represents the 5 books of the Torah. The number 7 represents completion. The number 12 represents the 12 tribes of Israel. They are symbolic. So when you understand that, and again, Matthew, his audience is exclusively Jewish people. That's who he's writing it to. So when he's saying those symbolic numbers, he's throwing out those numbers. He's speaking shorthand to his audience. If we know that, now we can get a more robust picture of what he's talking about. Let me give you an example in our context. If I say the number 23, Michael Jordan, that quick, right? Number 23. Now, this is a great story, all right? Hang with me, even if you're not a sports person, this is gonna make sense. Michael Jordan, number 20, I say 23, Michael Jordan. We're in church, he's like, Michael Jordan. You know, he didn't even worship, and he was like, Michael Jordan, you know. We know who Michael Jordan is, right? Okay, so quick story. Michael Jordan wins 3 championships and retires. He goes to play baseball. It doesn't go so well. There's a strike in baseball, and he decides to come back to the NBA. He comes back to the NBA. He doesn't come back at number 23. He comes back as number 45, not number 23. Michael Jordan, who's known for being a clutch player. Michael Jordan, who's known for his killer instinct. Michael Jordan, who never went to a game 7 in a championship series and won every. Okay, Michael Jordan in the playoffs has the ball with the game on the line. We're in number 45, and a guy named Nick Anderson steals the ball from him, and they lose the game. After the game, the reporter puts a microphone in Nick Anderson's face and says, "How did that feel?" And he said, "I could have never done that to 23. And then the line that will live in infamy, he said, 45 is not 23. Okay. Is he talking about numbers? No, he's not talking about the number 45. He's not talking about the number 23. He's talking symbolic. He's saying the same dude, he's not the same dude wearing 45 to 23. And of course, Michael Jordan shows up the next game, pulls off his warm-ups, and he's wearing 23. He took a fine and everything. The number had been retired. He snatched it out of retirement and said 23's back, all right? And then went on to win 3 more championships. So the idea is, again, we understand the idea of numbers being symbolic. When you look at that, now that's a literary element that Matthew uses. So in that story, feeding the 5,000, were there literally 5,000 people? It says there were 5,000, not including women and children. Maybe, I don't know, there might have been 5,000. I don't think that's the point Matthew's making. What Matthew seems to be making with this 5 books of the Torah, 2 tablets, they're on the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. He's talking about God's chosen people, the 12 tribes of Israel. It's just steeped in Hebrewism. And so he's like, okay, the same God who provides and loves these people, right? Jesus serving these people, they go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. The other side of the Sea of Galilee is Gentile, it's pagan. And the number 4 in Jewish symbolism is the 4 corners of the earth. So it represents the Gentile world. So when he goes and feeds the 4,000, and they use 7 loaves of completion, and they have 7 baskets left over, it seems like the point Matthew is making isn't just about quantitative 5,000, 4,000. What he's ultimately doing is talking qualitatively. He's saying this, don't forget, Jewish people, don't forget God's covenant with Abraham, which is, I want to bless the whole world through you. You're my chosen people, but it's not just about you. I want to do something in you that I want to do through you that will go to the ends of the earth. So just like in chapter 14, I fed you, in chapter 15, I feed the ends of the earth. Don't get caught up in just you, but what I'm trying to do through you. Does that make sense? Now, this thing starts to take on a whole new power because I have the literature right, I've got the history right, now I start to get the theology right. Now that starts to tell me what I'm supposed to do about it. How am I supposed to think? If this is how God thinks, how am I supposed to think, okay? So this is what we want to continue to do. All right, I don't just want to get you thinking about this stuff, I want to arm you to be able to do it well. Last week we gave away one of these. This is the best study Bible I've ever used. I wish I would have had this for the last 20 years instead of the last couple years. This is so good. I get no kickbacks. I told you last week I have nothing going on with Amazon, but if you go on Amazon, you can get one for free. If you want, we did a drawing last week. We gave one away last week. We're going to give another one away this week. So I don't know how we're going to do it. Do you have a QR code or something? What do we do? I should have thought about that. What are we doing? There it is. All right. So if you text the 9700 text study Bible, it'll send you a link. You click that link, free, but you just fill it out. It'll take you 30 seconds. And then we'll enter in the drawing. We're going to give another one of these away this week. I got another resource to encourage you with. All right. So this book is phenomenal. It's called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, written by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart. All right, so have you ever wondered, you read there's all these translations of the Bible, so you read the NIV, and you're like, who wrote the NIV? Like, who decided that the NIV was the NIV, right? You probably wondered that. All right, so it's a committee of some of the best scholars in the world that ultimately go through. So the NIV, for example, first came into being in the early 80s. Hasn't been around that long. But even as they've continued to advance in scholarship and understand a lot of the early writings even better, they find some little discrepancies, things they can do better. So in 2011, they released a revised version of the NIV. Okay, so there's a committee of people that do that. Gordon Fee was one of those people. So this is one of the most prominent scholars. He actually passed away a couple years ago. But this is his 4th edition revision of this book, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. We talked last week, sometimes people go, hey, I'm going to read the Bible all the way through cover to cover. Great. I would encourage you, before you read the Bible cover to cover, read this book first, because this will help you understand how to read the Bible cover to cover. I can't recommend it highly enough, all right? So I'll continue to keep that in front of you. All right. Let's go into Genesis 1. We're going to look at, based on what we just talked about, literature, history, and theology. We're going to start all the way at the beginning of the first cover of the Bible. So a couple things I want to show you. So one is, if you do have the cultural background study Bible, I'm going to demonstrate to you one way that this will absolutely change the way that you would read the Bible. So go ahead and bring up that first screenshot. Oh, actually, yeah, that's good. Okay, so that first screenshot, you'll notice right there as you look at it, you see how that second heading down there says literary setting? So before you even start reading in Genesis, you can look at a lot of the elements of literary style. So go ahead and go to that genre chart that I gave you. I think I skipped over that. So this is kind of a basic chart. Yeah, go back one. So this is a basic chart of all the 66 books of the Bible, and then some different categories or genres that they fall in. So it's everything from the law to poetic books, to the major and minor prophets, to the Gospels, the epistles, and the letters. And what I want you to bear in mind with this, okay, you don't need to memorize this or whatever, but what I want you to think about is that within these books, it's not as clean as okay, this book is an Old Testament narrative book, or that's written in narrative form. What you're gonna find is poetry or poetic literary elements are scattered throughout the whole Bible. And we're gonna see it as poetic elements as early as Genesis 1. So this is why a study Bible is so helpful, because when you're reading it, before you just start charging in, it will show you and tell you about some of those different literary elements, so you're prepared as you start to read them, and you're aware and you're looking for them. So let's go to Genesis 1. If you start reading in Genesis 1, you're gonna notice pretty quickly that there are stanzas, right? So you'll start to notice even the literary style. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and you'll notice some things that will kind of jump off the page to you. So you're gonna notice that there are some refrains. So you're gonna see that it's repeated multiple times in Genesis 1, that after God creates on a day, or he creates something, it says that he saw that it was good. And then he does the second day and it says, and he saw that it was good. Then he does the third day and it saw that it was good. So you're gonna see that's repeated. He saw that it was good. Then you're gonna see another refrain that will be on there, and it'll say, there was evening and there was morning, and then there was the first day. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So they keep repeating that over and over again. So if we're looking, before we start deciding what theological truths we want to get from Genesis 1, we start with the literary nature of this. And so we start to notice when you see those type of refrains, just like if you wrote a poem and you had something you said at the end of every line, pretty clearly, that's one of the main points you're making. That's the thing you want the listener to hear because you keep saying it over and over again. And so we know we want to pay special attention to those two refrains. There was evening and there was morning, and we want to pay attention to the refrain that he saw that it was good, okay? Okay, now when you do some historic, and go to that next screenshot, that number 2 screenshot, what you're gonna have in this cultural background study Bible is, this is, again, I just took a screenshot out of this one, but what you're gonna see is he's going to explain some of the historical context. So if you think about this, who is writing this? The book is attributed to Moses. Who is he writing to? The children of Israel. When? After hundreds of years of being in Egyptian slavery. Where does he write it to them? Well, it's a few months after they have come through the Red Sea and escaped Egypt. So they're now free, and they are at Mount Sinai, and you have a group of people who have a mixture of theology, the study of God, and cosmology, the study of the origins of the cosmos. They have this mixture of oral history that's come from their Hebrew family members and the Egyptian cosmologies and theologies that they've been told as they lived in that culture. We know that the Egyptian theologies lingered because all the way into the book of Joshua, even after Moses is dead and gone, Joshua's still telling them to put away their Egyptian idols. He's still telling them not only to put away the idols, but put away those theologies. So this is a moment in time where Moses is going, look, I want to take a moment to hit the reset button on some important things because we have hundreds of years of bondage in Egypt that we have to start sorting out theologically and psychologically. Is this making sense? So what you have when you start to look in that screenshot I showed you explains what would have been some of the obstacles and the mindsets that group of people would have had coming out of that culture. So one of the things it talks about is how they would have how Egyptians viewed the nature of existence. So if I say to you, hey, something didn't exist and now it exists, in our world, we think it had no physical properties, now it has physical properties. It had no atoms, now it has atoms. Or experientially, we know there are things like love or time that don't have atoms, but they're very real. Those exist. So we'd be talking about one of those two things. In the Egyptian mindset, the idea of existence didn't necessarily have to do with physical properties, but of having a role or ultimately a purpose or function. So think about this. Some of you have experienced this where it feels like times in your life where you don't feel like you have any role or function. It almost feels like you don't exist. Like, you know you have a body, you know you're here, but you're like, oh, I feel invisible. I feel like I don't know who I am. Essentially, I don't know who I am. I don't feel like I exist because I don't have a role and function. So in the Egyptian world, not only people, but things like water, things like sky, physical things, it wasn't that they didn't have physical properties, it was talking about what was their role and function. So now knowing that, it starts to make sense why, as Moses is telling this story, he's saying God gave function. He took light and darkness and he separated them and then he named them. This is why, again, culturally, naming something was very significant because you're declaring its function or its role. So he calls light day and he calls darkness night, and what is he doing? He's giving it a function and he's creating time, okay? And so each of these things, again, as he makes the ecosystem, he's giving it function as he's bringing it, not only giving it physical properties, But ultimately, again, this ties into what they would have understood in terms of the concept of existence. And so then what he uses here from a literary element, okay, so now we're just going back and forth between literature and history, and then theology is just going to jump off the page. So now when we think about literary, we're going to look at the structure, okay? So go ahead and bring up that chart of the days of creation. So again, this is a summary of Genesis 1, and then the bottom is Genesis 2. So day 1, he separates the light and the darkness. Day 2, he separates the sky and the water. Day 3, he separates the land and sea. Day 4, he creates the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, birds and fish. Day 6, beasts and humans. All right, now let's stay there for a second. Notice, okay, this is built in what's called a chiastic structure. So a chiastic structure, we talked about this back, if you remember the Sermon on the Mount. We talked about chiastic structures. Chiastic structures are structured A, B, C, C, B, A, okay? So go ahead and go to the whole story of Noah. I'm going to give it to you super quick here. Go ahead and bring it up. The story of Noah is written in a chiastic structure. Go ahead and bring this up. We don't have time to do the whole flood narrative today, but I just want to show it to you as a literary element. And it's not A, B, C, C, B, A. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to P, and then back down to A. So if you look at the story, you'll see that it is structured all leading to the center. And if you went to P there, the point in the center, the greatest point, is that God remembered Noah. So he's going to tell a whole story that's structured, all right? It builds up and then back down, but in the center, and the reason this matters is because the structure helps you see the most important point. There are going to be a lot of points that are made along the way, but the structure helps you see the main point. And the main point there, the letter P, is that God remembers Noah. In other words, in all of this hardship and this huge trial and this crazy experience, God never forgot his relationship to Noah. That is the main, not the only, but the main theological point of the story of Noah. How would I know that other than understanding the literary element that points me to the main point? So that's a bigger example. The whole book of Leviticus, the whole book is written as a chiasm or chiastic structure. So let's go back to 7 days of creation. This structure, this literary structure, is what we would call a parallelism or an inverted chiasm. So instead of being A, B, C, go ahead and bring it up. Instead of being A, B, C, C, B, A, it's A, B, C, A, B, C. So look at this, day 1 and day 4. Light and darkness. Look at day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Look at day 2 and day 5, sky and waters. And day 5, birds and fish. Look at day 3, land and seas. And day 6, beasts and humans. Make sense? So the point here is he's giving us a literary design, literary structure, so that we know what category to put this in. This isn't a lab report. He's not making statements about literal time. You could make the argument that there are 24 hours in a day and it was a literal 7-day creation because he made night and day and of course gave it function, and therefore they defined a day as this many hours, all of that. You could do that, but the point isn't to argue for, was this a literal 7-day creation or not? Maybe it wasn't, maybe it wasn't. That's not ultimately the point. And when you're looking at interpretation, you're reading, whether it's a poem, whether it's a historical narrative, whether it's a prose, whatever you're reading, you're calling up your buddy and going, what's the point? What point are you making? You're looking at the text, you're trying to understand literature and the literary style and what is it pointing to. Looking at the historical elements, what is it pointing to? What is the point of this text? So once you start doing that and we understand this isn't something that, he's necessarily making a statement about sequence. He's giving us a poem that ultimately will then cause, there was some common ground that they would have had with their beliefs about that they were given in Egypt, but then the biggest points come from the contrast between Yahweh, Elohim, Adonai, the God ultimately that will be of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God that Moses is presenting to them, and the gods of Egypt. The gods of Egypt they created humans. Their cosmology was, they believe they created humans because they were tired of making their own food, raising their own plants, and taking care of their own needs. So they created humans as slaves to pamper them. The image of the gods was not on human beings. The image of the gods, the only human beings the image of the gods was ever on were certain kings or in certain statues and temples. That's why you would try to get in proximity to the temple, because the closer you could get to the god, the more you could appease the god, and then the god would keep you safe or give you something great. They never thought of themselves as being in the image of God. They never saw themselves as being created to be partners with God. It was just to be slaves of God. So now, when you read the text and you start to see that in verse 26 of chapter 1, he says, let's make mankind, man and woman, in our image. Now they're starting to see these people who have been hundreds of years, all they know is bondage and slavery and oppression, are starting to look and go, wait a second. We thought that was only for kings and important statues, but no, we are made in God's image. Who's made in God's image? Who's made in my image? My children are made in my image. My children bear my likeness. He's like, you are my sons and daughters. You are my children. And so this is starting to shape their theology. He gives them ultimately a new, fresh, reset theology of work. And so it says in chapter 2 that when he had created all the world, he had created the whole ecosystem, and it said, but things weren't doing what they were supposed to do because God had not yet sent rain, and there was no man and woman to work the ground. So he sends rain and brings man into the world. What is he doing? He's going, look, this isn't just you make bricks to appease me, or you show up so that I'm not mad at you because I see you as a slave. He's saying, be my partner in the world. I've made this great world with this great ecosystem with great work to do, and I'm not just having you do it for me. I want to do this with you. I'm inviting you. I'll send rain, you work the ground, and we'll bear fruit together. So he's inviting man and woman into partnership with God, made in his image. And then, of course, the refrain we come back to is not only it was good, it was good, it was good, but we see the evening, morning refrain, which this time last year, we looked at how in the Jewish mindset, the day starts when you go to sleep. It starts in the evening instead of the morning. Why? So that the first act of the day, every day, is to go into a catatonic state and to rest. Rest is not a reward for a hard day of work. It's the way you start every day. You come from a place of rest, because in my rested state where I'm producing nothing, I'm loved and approved of by God. I'm his son. You're his daughter. And so it's in that state that I wake up and I get to work. Rising and grinding is the second part of your day, not the first part of your day. And I come from a rested, psychological, emotional state. We see, again, it starts to jump off the page. You see that God, it said he completed all of his work of creation. So then he rested. Well, had he completed it all? No. There were still seeds that would be planted that would produce new. There would need to be pruning. He created humans. They're going to make messes. He's going to have to redeem. There was lots of work to do, but it was enough work for that day that I can set my work down and I can psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally and physically rest. So now the theology starts to be born out of the literature and the history. And the more that I understand now, I can see some common ground that I got a little bit of Egyptian baggage myself. And I got a little bit of this that I'm always feeling like there's just more work to do. And now I have to learn that actually what God wants me to do is go, that was enough for today. That was enough for today. I'm putting this down today to be able to set it aside, to be able to see that God thinks and sees me as good and sees you as good, that God says it is good, that I'm made in his image, and all of these different elements. Now, because of the history and literature, I don't get hung up in details that are not part of the point. We're able to keep the main thing, and see the point. And so I want to encourage you, I want to invite you to continue to walk this process, right? Take a manageable pace, get the right tools in front of you, and day in and day out, continue to go into God's word. And as you do, and you just like with my friend, who sent me this letter, the more questions I ask, the more I honor the letter. The deeper that I dig, the more that I'm willing to discover, the more that I'm honoring the letter, the more that I'll get to what was actually the intent, not only of the author, but the one who inspired the author. So let's keep taking this journey together. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, I pray that as we continue to seek and find, that you'll continue to produce within us grace and truth. And Lord, I know what this journey has been like for me, and I got a long way to go, but I know that the more that I dig deep, the more that I seem to develop more grace for other people. I start to see, Lord, how people can see things differently than me, or even areas where I was really stubborn, and yet, Lord, with more information, I might be less stubborn, but I might be less certain. And all of that, God, produces the same grace and truth, Lord, that you extend to me and offer for me to extend to others. I pray, Lord, as we as your sons and daughters dig into your word, that just like we looked at Genesis 1 and 2 today, that these great life lessons that you want to give us, these deep theologies that really show up so practically, like in things like our rest and a healthy self-image and a view of work that's right, to take you up on your offer to be your partners for this period that we get to live and breathe. And so, God, I pray, Lord, for each of my brothers and sisters, Lord, as we take this journey, God, that you would continue to bring revelation in a timely way. We love you. We thank you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Everybody said amen.